Hello and welcome to the Volleycast. I'm your host, Joe Trinzi, and all the way from Las Vegas, we got Harjiv Singh.
Yep.
Not Dr. Harjiv Singh, but how long before you'll have your PhD and I can call you doctor?
Hopefully another year or two, man.
Okay, another year or two. And you are in, what will be like the name, you're at UNLV, but like what's, like, is there like a sports science, like what's kind of, like how would you determine where you're at? Like how would you describe?
Yeah, so I'm currently a second year PhD student in the motor learning and control program here. And I'm under Dr. Gabby Wolf, who is my advisor. And I get to study sort of attention and intrinsic motivation and how that affects performance of learning. So.
Yeah. So for those of you guys who aren't total motor learning nerds, Dr. Gabby Wolf is, I don't know, probably to me like the biggest name in motor learning right now, or at least to me like maybe one of the most exciting or innovative people in the past couple of decades. So being a PhD student under her that speaks pretty highly of you and all of that. And you're doing a lot of research, like you said, on the effects of attention and this sort of internal, external focus of control. Am I kind of saying that right? Basically, like,
Yeah.
do you think about, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's just, we primarily look at internal versus external focus of attention, but we're moving more towards, how does attention affect intrinsic motivation, and how does that all kind of go together? Because, what the research has shown time and time again that just focusing externally or on the movement effect. So for volleyball, just concentrating on where you're going to hit the ball versus, where you're going to, versus, where your elbow is, for example. That's more beneficial for motor learning, but by doing so, you raise your levels of confidence. And so with levels of confidence raised, that it's like a circular effect, right? With you get attention, you get more confident, keep going. And that's how, you learn and perform better, essentially. And so,
Yeah, I would say that this sort of package of ideas, that I guess, like, would you say that Gabby Wolf was the originator of these? She's the first person I heard them from. Would she
yeah.
sort of be the original of these?
Yeah, I think when it comes to motor learning and when you're learning a motor task and stuff like that, yeah, I think she was definitely the first to put a definition on it. The idea has been here. It's been in psychology since the late 1800s, but no one's put a label on it until 1999 when Dr. Wolf was. I think she was learning how to windsurf, and
Yeah.
she kind of just
And
figured it
this
out.
sort of like three-part package is autonomy support, enhanced expectancy, and external focus. It's kind of this three-part package of ideas. And this has been the most influential probably package of ideas that I've seen in the past, like maybe 3 to 4 years is when I started really getting into this. And the effect it's had on my coaching has been huge. And it's just something that I've, over the past couple of years since we've been corresponding and just kind of going back and forth on text or email and getting to meet up every now and then, just brainstorming about you, back and forth has been huge for me. And especially this idea of this external focus, basically saying, like, not thinking about your body parts, not thinking about, but trying to think about what you want the effect of your movement to be. And, it's just really interesting that you're tying it into confidence, because so I'm just kind of come from my perspective and my journey as a coach is like, in the beginning of when you're coaching, you just don't know anything. And I was an okay college player, sure, but it's not like I was a world-class player. It's not like not like I was a master of the skills myself. I mean, maybe compared to some high school kids, I was a master, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not like I was as great. And then when I really started studying volleyball and learning to coach, I really started to learn some of the technique very well. So I became this incredible error detector. I could watch a high school kid and, oh, this is what you're doing wrong on this approach and this passing technique. And I just loved telling them that. And I don't mean it in like a crappy way, but I was so excited that I understood these nuances of technique that I started to become this error detector, and I got my players really good at it. Like they could really, oh yeah, I did this wrong with my arms, or I took the wrong step, or even when they did it right, oh yeah, I felt that I did the correct step this or the correct step there. And I do think that there is value there, because I think when you look at like learners in general, like you have your kids that they can never go from JV to varsity because they're just clueless. They're not aware at all of what they're doing. Whatever, I hit ball out, I don't even care. I'm not even listening to anything like that. But then you get these kids that they think they stick at this next plateau because they become so good at identifying their mistakes. They don't develop the idea to what I now know as focus on the effects of their action. They don't even know, they can't even form a concrete visualization of what a good swing really feels like. What does the ball feel like going off their hand? What sound does it make? What trajectory does a perfect serve look like as it's clearing the net? And what I have now realized is all of my feedback, what I mean is none of my feedback focused on that. All of my feedback focused on what their body was doing. So of course they had no real great idea of what the ball was going to be doing. And now I'm really curious as to how that ties into confidence, because I think it's natural to think if you're always micro-analyzing what your body is doing, you're always going to find like another nit to pick. So it's just this, I mean, I'm like, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I'm not surprised to hear that now you're seeing this link to confidence.
No, I agree, and I think there's a lot to go with this because you know you talk about performing under pressure, for example. That's huge when it comes to attention. How does that affect, scores 24-22? What do you tell your player? you know, is error detection at that point, good or bad? I would probably say it's bad, but it's all these different questions you got to think about. Um, and then I think practice conditions also matter because this whole new constraint slow approach. If you heard about it, I mean,
Totally.
coaches they're just thriving over. And what the whole point is that you're concentrating on the effect of your environment, right? Which is an external focus. So there's a lot there to unravel. I think there's so many questions that are left to answer in terms of attention. My research right now is looking into that, but related to volleyball. So hopefully we can find something cool and we'll go from there. But I think you're absolutely right, man. I think most coaches are very internally, I want to fix an error. When there's a bandwidth of error, that's one. And number two, sometimes, uh, there may be, certain things you want to say that may not benefit them at all. And, it just detracts from confidence, their high levels of confidence. And so it is something that coaches need to play around with. And by making this link, back in 2016, that's what brought me here, maybe move across the country. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more. And like I said, many more questions remain, but
Here's two ways that just immediately struck out to me. So anybody who's coached club volleyball or just high school age kids or whatever like that, they have seen the team, or maybe it's been their own team, that they get aced in serve receive. And what's the first thing that they do? They all look over at the coach.
Yep.
Because it's like, oh,
Yeah.
tell me what I screwed up, or tell me what the problem was. Or even, hey, tell me how to fix it. And it's like that you would never see that in the Olympics.
Yeah.
So it's this training thing of that's an immature athlete who doesn't understand that, like, that's the last place that you need to look in order to correct that mistake. Or the second thing is, for example, like if you're coaching a high school age kid or something, a middle school age kid like that, and they do a passing rep, and you ask them, hey, what, something like, oh, hey, did you do the right arm work? Whatever it is. Hey, was your technique right there? They're going to look at you and sort of say, they're going to try to decipher by the tone of your voice. And everything that they're doing is not forming a visual of the skill as to it should be. They're all cued to you trying to figure out your interpretation, because that's what teenagers are a master of, trying to get through the world and navigate the adults around them. So what it is none of these kids have this strong visual of what this highly executed skill looks like.
Yeah, I would 100% agree there. And I think, you know, coaches need to do a better job in how they communicate this information and how they practice. Because we talk about transfer, and it's true. The way you practice, if you're very controlling in practice, you're going to be controlling in a game. And so it's these things that you have to look into, which man, we can go on for hours on this.
Tell me, like, what I'm always trying to figure out is how to have external cues that don't feel goofy and contrived. It's like when you're trying to talk about how to push off from, your approach, and, oh, you need to have a longer stride or this or that. And, I hear coaches saying things like, imagine you're jumping over a barrier, and then coaches start jumping over a barrier, which introduces these artificial things that maybe are not what we want, and this or that. Like, this is like an impossible question. So I'm just, maybe as an introduction to brainstorm, it's like, how do coaches go about making their cues more about the effect of the action without them feeling, A, without the cues feeling goofy, or B, without the cues just becoming hit it hard?
Yeah.
Because that's not helpful either, really. I mean, it's not the worst thing.
I think you're bringing up a good point. There's in the external focus realm, there's the distance of the external focus. So you have an external focus that can be closer to your body, and then you have one that's farther away from your body. So, for example, let's just say we're learning how to, we're hitting a ball. We can concentrate on the ball, which is closer to my body, which is going to basically relate to technique, and the more distal effect, or the more distal external focus would be the target location. And the whole idea is that when you're learning a skill, you essentially need to master a technique before you go ahead and you actually progress towards a level of expertise. And so what we're finding is, a more proximal external focus closer to our body is more beneficial for technique and mastering techniques. So, you bring the point on the approach. When you're doing the approach, you have the 3 or 4 steps that you're learning how to do. Your distal external focus could be, you're concentrating on, let's just say there's a ball that's being tossed or passed or whatever that may be. And your more proximal external focus could be, the next step that you're about to take, for example. So coaches would have to sort of deal with that and figure out that continuum. But that's the issue, right? When we talk about the internal external debate, it's not that all external foci are better. There's a continuum there. Sometimes you may have to do some internal focus before you move on. And I think the most important takeaway is that the attentional focus literature is all about execution. So I can take you away from the context and go all internal if I have to. But right before I do my movement, or right before I perform, I need to hear that external cue or that external focus of attention, and then boom, I will perform. And so I think that's a misconception that's out there. But I think that's how I would sort of deal with this. When you're learning technique, go from more of a proximal focus all the way. Then it's like going from a novice to an expert, right? Go from a more proximal to a more distal, and I'm sure you'll see some sort of benefit to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to sort of relate that because, just anecdotally, I've seen that when working with players. Like, for example, you almost can sort of like using that distance sort of concept, you almost can sort of, um, the more advanced you are, it's like the further out they can go.
Yeah.
And you almost can see like where they lose focus almost. For example, like that's really making me think about like beginning server, like advanced servers really like to focus on, in my experience, one of two things: either where the ball is going to cross the net, so they're like looking at the net and going just a little bit up and trying to figure out where they want to cross, or at the point of landing, like, okay, where the ball is going to land. And okay, and those are pretty far away. And some beginning servers I find benefit from that, but then some, it just, they can't connect that far away. And they need to, like you said, they need to think about the ball, or they need to think about like where a toss is going to end up or something like that. So, that's kind of that's a good concept to think about.
Yeah, I think for serving, for example, I think the best sort of continuum is, learning to step towards the net, external related, and you're kind of working on that technique. Then more so to the ball, then more so to a target. Just kind of using that sort of
Yeah.
continuum to learn serving.
Yeah. I mean,
But
one of the best cues for servers with toss, for like high school age servers with the toss, is to think about tossing towards where you want
yeah,
to serve the ball to, because so beginning servers, they toss the ball back towards themselves and then they lose
yeah,
all their power. So when they think about like tossing it out there, or things like serve, like if you're doing a jump float, do your
yeah,
jump float across, jump, hit your serve, and sort of keep jogging right towards your target. And a lot of kids can't do it because they fall sideways as they serve. So then they very quickly can kind of see, that's a little bit of a combination now, maybe between an external focus and a constraint. And as you
yeah,
said, like giving the constraint that you must have to be able to serve and continue running towards your target, that kind of like that links up, and maybe that's the reason why the constraints based coaching is, where you, instead of trying to directly cue the athlete, you engineer the environment so that
yeah.
they must create the solution, because it has this external.
Yeah, I 100% agree there. I wanted to say something. Oh yeah, one important thing that coaches should consider is always keeping the goal of the task in mind. I think what happens is with our with our cueing and our feedback and all that, we take away the goal of the task,
Yes.
and by doing so, we may induce like more of an internal sort of tech movement related focus, and it takes away from what the actual goal is. And so I think that's something to really consider, because for example, I walked into a couple of gyms here, and there's players on their knees hitting a ball into the net at the 10-foot line. It's something that I've seen quite a bit here when they're learning how to swing. Um, is that really the goal of swinging? Of doing a serve or hitting? They need to be up. They need to be moving. Just to keep that in mind when they're designing these practices. And I think it's super crucial to at least, again, taking this to research and applying it to practice.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Kind of one of the things you said. Okay, you can't forget about the goal and all that. And I think one of the things that to me, like this idea of external focus of control, the effects of your action, is there's this very sort of maybe popular and popular for some good reasons to mantra in coaching is, okay, we are not going to be outcome focused coaches. We're going to be process driven coaches. We're going to focus on the process. And then what you have is coaches, they're coaching their player and they're really focused and trying to do it right. And I've done this before too. I don't do this anymore for the most part. Okay, player goes up and they do the technique the way you want and they hit the ball in the net. You say, oh, that was a great swing. And no, it wasn't a great swing. That's the worst thing you can do in volleyball, is hit the ball in the net. And I think that is creating at best, it's creating confusion in your players. At likely, it's they're losing trust in you. and they're losing
Yeah.
confidence in general because you're telling me that was a good swing. I just hit the ball in the net. What you're trying to say, what the coach is trying to say, and I've done this too, is if you keep repeating that technique,
Yeah.
you will hone in on the solution that will ultimately be better for some reason, because maybe that technique altered your jump. You jumped a little higher than you're used to, so you caught the ball low on your hand. Okay. And like, we don't always have time to say all that. So I understand the thing. But I think coaches have to be very careful about praising a poor result that they think was gotten through the correct technique. In my opinion, my general strategy right now is to say nothing when that happens, just kind of ignore it. And what I'm looking for is when they do the technique that I believe was correct, and then there is the result, and say, okay, now we're connecting that result. But I think it's a backlash against maybe these sort of like only sort of maybe like winning focused or short term, like myopic. If it was a kill, that means it was good. And if it was an error, that means it was bad. I'm just going to like say good job when you get a kill, and I'm going to yell at you when you don't get an error. Like, okay, that is not the right way to coach. But in some ways, these sort of popular coaching, maybe like popular sort of quote unquote knowledgeable coach is now, okay, I'm not even going to talk about the kills or anything like that. I'm only going to focus on the minutia of your technique. And that, I think, is not the most effective way to coach either.
Yeah, I think that comes down to this whole thing of confidence and autonomy. Building that autonomy, supportive environment, I think, is crucial to kind of offset that. Feedback in general, some of it can be necessary for learning, not necessary. It can hinder learning. I mean, there's so many things. Not saying anything is can also be beneficial. One of the things that you mentioned. A player who hits the ball into the net but does everything else right, and that's the thing, that's something that I think maybe as a teenager, that's something that you want to hear is, hey, I really liked your approach. Just because you hit the ball into the net doesn't matter. You did this really well. Just kind of highlight the good is really important to, again, go back to confidence and self-efficacy and all that. So
And you know what? I'll even kind of just parse what you just said there is players need to know what you were communicating just in that statement, whether you meant to or not, is a bunch of things need to happen in order to have a successful play. You could have had a good approach, but you started it at the wrong time. Like, you produce a lot of power in that approach. You were just too early. That's why you hit the ball in the net. So like, you can, hey, that piece was good. Now figure out the timing. Or, hey, your approach was good, but your arm swing was jacked up, and that's why you missed it. Or actually, pretty much everything about it was good. You just tried to paint the sideline on a set that wouldn't allow you to do that. So if you would have kind of had the same process and you would have just maybe went a little more conservative towards the back corner, that would have been a good swing or something like that. How do you think that the players viewing it in like, because that's not like too sectioned in my opinion, but I'd be curious kind of what you're thinking from like the motor learning perspective. Like, is that a valid thought for a learner to have? Like, the approach was good, but the swing was not good, because the whole skill is kind of the approach and the swing. But is there like, are we messing them up by saying something
no,
like that was a good approach but a bad swing? Like,
I think you mess them up if you just don't say anything. I think it's at least they know what they did right and what they need to work on. And I take a lot of educational psychology courses here, just to better understand teaching and instruction. And so you got to really make sure these players own their own learning. I think that's one of the main things. Is coaches think that and tell me if I'm wrong because I don't coach, but coaches probably think that they're in charge of their players' learning. Um, when the coach's sole job is to just facilitate their learning, it's to create an
yeah.
environment that they
You
can
know
learn.
what? As you're saying that, here's what's making me think, and tying it back to our example of this hitter hitting the ball in the net, because we're saying, "Oh, that was a good one," or should we not say anything or anything of this? Ultimately, the player's going to hit that ball, and they are going to give themselves a value judgment, like, for lack of a better term, good or bad,
Yeah.
before you say anything.
Yeah.
And that's a very important thing, is for us to see what, for us to observe the learner.
Yeah.
What did they think about that rep? Because if they hit the ball in the net and they're like, if you look at your player, sometimes they're thinking that hit sucked. And then if you're like, great hit, they're going to be like, what is going on? And so maybe you see that they're registering, that hit sucked and all that. And you tell them, hey, go try it again.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, like we both know that wasn't your best one. Okay, go ahead, give it again. Like give it another shot or two before we feed it. And then a lot of times what I'm hoping is like, maybe the next one's not great, but then the third one is pretty good. And you say, okay, there we go. That's the one that you're working on. So sometimes your job is just to like move them on and don't let them dwell on it. But like sometimes you'll see they'll hit the ball in the net and they'll kind of have this puzzled reaction, like, oh, I thought I did it right. Why did it go in the net? And then that's when you come in with like, okay, here's what you did well, and here's the piece that you didn't do well. And they're like, oh, okay, now I understand. Like, now I understand why I made that mistake. And then like sometimes they hit the ball in the net, and you can just look at them and they can see, they know what they messed up, and then you don't need to say anything. It's okay, go again. You know what I mean? So it's like I think as you were saying that, like that's one of the biggest light bulbs for me was just like, don't assume that the player is thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. Don't assume that what I think was a good play that they know was a good play, or what I think was a bad play that they think was a bad play. Like you said, like we gotta like observe the learner.
I think one of the most powerful tools coaches have in their arsenal is analyzing video. And so like key takeaway is we do all these recordings of our games, of our matches and whatnot, and we tell players to go ahead and analyze their own film and whatnot. Um, but rarely do we ever show them film of what they did really, really well. We'll show them, good stuff, but it's more so things that we can change, we can fix. I'll give an outside hitter film on basically, I'll tell them, hey, you hit this ball out because your elbow was too high or whatever it may be. Video analysis it's just, unfortunately, it's not been researched enough in terms of the effect of that. But I think that's so crucial, is to show your players their own sort of best performances. Let them then take that and compare it to video maybe you send that they could improve on, and let them figure out what they need to do better. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Like I said, taking educational psychology courses, I know I sit in classes with teachers that are teaching like math and science. And so what they share in terms of how to better develop curriculum and how to better develop their feedback and all that, I mean, it goes hand in hand with sports in general. So
Well, you know what? I love what you just said there, because we're coming up on time, but I'm trying
yeah,
to just do a bunch of these podcasts that can give the coaches some actionable tips. And what
sure.
you just said right there is, every coach right now who's trying to figure out how they can help their players can do that. So
Yeah.
like if you're listening to this right now, you can go on and you can create a highlight video for your players, and you can say, hey, here was your 10 best swings for this last season. And here's 10 awesome kills that you had. Here's where you really put it together. And here's this clip that I made for you. And whenever you're missing volleyball right now or the next 2 months, you can just watch those clips of you doing it well. And then like when you get back on the court, like that's exactly how you're going to hit the ball, something like that. Like that's one thing that any coach can do right now.
And I think one of the to even progress that a little bit further, what coaches could do is, I think the most important, like going back to just owning your own learning. Watching film is one thing. So yeah, send your players film on what they did really, really well, like your best 10 hits or whatever. But then allow them to respond to you. Give them like a prompt. Ask
Yeah.
them, what was it about these hits that you think made you successful? Right? Let them answer it, and then let them send it back to you and whatnot, just to kind of get a way to see how they're thinking. Another way is to one day send their best or 10 best hits, and then 2 days later send their worst hits.
Yeah.
Again, let them figure it out. Give them a prompt, give them a question. What did you think was the difference between this and this? let them figure out what's going on in the environment and whatever it may be. And again, just own up to what they're doing. They'll learn so much more than just sending a film and saying, "Hey, these are your 10 best hits." Of course, confidence levels go up, great. Every 16-year-old girl wants to see, their best swings, even at the pros. But give them something tangible that they can do to really think about it, and then allow that. And that's a good way. We go back to, knowing more about your players. So that's the best way to do it right now, at least, is to figure out what their thinking process is. So,
Awesome. Well, there you go. So anybody listening to this, that's something that you can do right now to help your players. And anybody who tries that, please get back to me. You can shoot me an email or tweet at me at the Volleycast and say like what you did and what prompt you give with your players. And more importantly, like what were some of their responses? Because I think we could all learn a lot from that. And Harjiv, thanks for joining us. We didn't even get at all into what we were planning on talking about tonight. So I think that just means like you need to come back on in a week or two, and we need to keep talking. Every time I love talking to you because every time we talk, what you do is you say like one sentence and somehow that like triggers like 17 ideas in my mind. And I start getting like so fired up about it that we like go off on these tangents. So we just need to keep talking more.
I love talking to coaches. I love talking to people like you. So, and I love your thinking process is awesome to hear, and it helps me out. So yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way. Anytime, man, I'm open.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, and thanks everybody for listening to the Volleycast. Take care.